Okay, the last video for today, and then you can do some exercises. I'm going to look at something called casting. That's the technical term, and what casting means is changing one data type into another, and I've put at the end if possible. It might not always be possible to do that, and we shall look at some examples if we can. So this is what I mean. I've got A, here is 3. Now that's inferring, remember that's guessing, that 3 is an integer. I'm putting it in there. And then I am casting it. So I'm saying I want it to be a string, and I've got this little, it's called a function. It's a built-in function, str and an open and close brackets. And inside there I've put the value that I want to change. So I've said convert A into a string and store it in S. And if we have a look at S, S should be a string, and S should be looking like that. So A equals 3 with no quote marks around it as a string. S would equal 3 with quote marks around it. So let's go and take a look at that in Python, just to prove what I'm saying. So let's do the exact same example. A equals 3. And what I'm going to do is find out what type A is. There we go. A is an integer. So now what I'm going to do is convert that into a string by calling str for string and then converting A and storing the result in S, assigning the result to S. So if I now do type of S, it should say string. There we go. So if I print out what S is, well, first of all, let's print out what A is. A is 3. S is the string 3. So that's called casting, but we have to be careful what we do. If you remember a float, let's do 3.14 for pi. If I wanted to cast that float to an integer, this required 2 storage locations, and you can think of it as a storage location for the bit before the decimal point and a storage location for after. What happens if I try to cast that? In other words, change that to an integer. So let's do that. A equals 3.14, and if I do type of A, it should tell me it's a float. And now I'm going to do B equals, and I'm going to cast that into an integer. So I'm saying int, because that's what I want, and then what have I got to do? What do I want to change? I want to change A into an integer and store it in B. So when I press enter, it's happy. If I do type of B, it will tell me it's an integer. Now, I've cast it, it worked. So let's take a look at the values. A, we haven't changed A, should be 3.14. And there we go. And B is 3. So when I cast a float to an integer, all it does is get rid of the decimal point and what's afterwards and give me the value. Let's do that the other way round. Let's take a value 5, A equals 5. The type is integer, which we already know, and I'm going to say that B equals, and I'm going to cast that to a float, float A. So type of A was integer, type of B is a float, and let's print out what A is. A is 5, B is 5.0. Okay, so you can see that we started off with 1 byte, and now we've got 1 byte there and 1 byte there, 2 bytes. So we've cast into a float. We can continue. I'm going to shut down the shell and restart it. You can continue if you want. I'm just running short of screen space. We can do numbers as well. As we've seen, we did A equals 3 and we cast that to a string, b equals string a, and when we print b, it's the string of that. But let's imagine that I've got a string and I want to cast that to an integer or a float. So I'm going to do, again, 3.14 pi. That's not very good. I need to do a equals 3.14. So I'm going to cast that into a float and an integer. So b equals float of a, and I'm going to do c equals int of a. So I'm changing the data type of what they are. So let's, we got a problem. We got, you cannot convert it to an integer with base 10. So let's take out that last one. Let's see what we got. So we've got A and we got B, but we can't do C because it, when it looked along the string, it found a decimal point and said, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that. Now remember, we converted 3 to a string before, but we cannot convert 3.14 to a string. Let's just prove that one. So A equals 3.14. So it's not a programming error, it's an actual casting error. B equals int of A, and we should get an error because it's got a decimal point in it. There we go. However, we can convert strings into integers. So if I did A equals the string 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, never mind. And if I did B equals string A, then it would nicely convert that to a string. Let me close this window down again so I can prove my next point. So we saw that as soon as we hit the decimal point, I couldn't convert the string into an integer. And in my programming, I might do all sorts of strange things. Let's imagine this. A equals the word hello. And I try and convert that into an integer. So if I do B equals int, so I'm hoping to get a number out of this, it should crash. And the same should happen with float. Now A is already hello, so I can just do B equals float A, and we get a crash. It can't do it because it's got the word hello in. What happened if I started my string with some numbers and then a word? Let's sort of do 27b for like a flat number, and I try to convert that to an integer. Well, it's got numbers at the start and then it's got the letter B, so B equals int of A, error. B equals a float of A, error. So it will not convert anything that is not purely a number, and it won't convert to an integer if it has a decimal point in it. One last thing I want to point out is it will do minus signs as well. So if A equals -3, and if I just do string A, it will print out -3 if I have a string. So S equals -2.1, because I don't think we covered floats above. So it will convert this to a float. It didn't convert this to an int, but it will convert it to a float. So let's do both of those. So let's do int S. That should give me a crash because it's got a decimal point in it. Okay, and if I do float s, that should be okay, because it recognises the minus sign and it recognises the decimal point. When we did the integer here, it recognised the minus sign, but the minute we put a decimal point in, it fails. So that is conversion. Last little bit. Sorry, it's going on a bit long. Let's take a look at the booleans. So, if a equals 1, can I convert that to a boolean? So b equals bool a, and if I just print out b, it says true. If I do a equals 0 and I do b equals bool a and then print out b, so it's false. That's nice. Let's do it the other way round, where a equals true and I want to cast that to an integer. So b equals int a, and let's do a few more. C equals float a, d equals string a, and let's see what we get from these. So b is 1, it's turned the true into an integer. C is 1.0, it's turned the true into a floating point number, and D is the word true in quotes. So it turned the word true into a string. And the same would happen if I was playing with false. So that is called casting, where we're changing the data type from one to another. We don't often use it in programming. It is useful, but it's a very rare occurrence. But it's something you need to know for your exam. You will be tested on these items here: int a, float a, string a, bool a. You'll be tested on what they do. So you need to know it, and we will play around with it just to make sure you have an understanding.